Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Grave Reviews. My name's Chris, and today I checked out the new movie Azrael, directed by Katz. This one stars Samara Weaving. So the movie is about a world in which the rapture has occurred, and the people that are left behind now either choose to be mute or are scarring themselves or whatever, making themselves unable to speak. And in this world, there's also these creatures that kind of look like they're from the Descent. They're burned ones. They look burnt, and they feast on human blood. And there is a cult that is hunting Samara Weaving and her boyfriend, lover. And then a lot of stuff happens, and we're going to dive into it. So I was really excited for this movie. The trailer I thought looked really interesting, and I love Samara Weaving. She is fantastic in just about everything I've seen her in. And so going into this, I had some concerns because the no talking thing is very gimmicky. I know it's been done before in A Quiet Place, and so knowing this was going to be a gimmick-style movie, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. There's a lot of positives I'll say about this thing up front. I think the gore is nastier than I was expecting, with some pretty great violent battles and action scenes. The creatures reminded me quite a bit of the creatures from The Descent, but they do have a cool look. They're all burnt, and some of the things they do in the film are also pretty great and pretty gnarly, which I enjoyed that aspect of it. I think the gimmick here doesn't really work, doesn't really make much sense to me, and overall kind of hurts the movie in a lot of ways. And I'm going to get into some spoilers because about halfway through this movie, a scene happens which kind of shifts the paradigm of what you think is happening in this world, or maybe not. Either way, it adds a layer of complexion, or maybe just a layer of confusion on top of what I understood was happening in this film. So, in A Quiet Place, they use the remaining quiet to great effect. It creates really tense sequences where they have to move around and do stuff like that, and you're always worried about them making some sort of noise and alerting the creatures. In this, I didn't understand it, because we're set up with two threats. We have these evil cult members, and we have the monsters. And it appears as though the monsters are attracted to blood, not necessarily sound or sight. Then you have the cult members who don't speak, but they can still hear, so I guess you have to be quiet around them. But it never felt like the gimmick was actually utilized for any purpose outside of just it being part of the marketing of the film or something. It certainly hurts the story, because you have sort of a interesting premise, which the world has already been raptured, and you're trying to understand the dynamics of the civilization now. And so they quickly set up like, oh, Samara Weaving and their boyfriend, they seem to be in love, so they're virtuous and they're morally grounded good people. And then the cult members are immediately set up as like evil and setting Samara Weaving up for a ritual to occur to get killed. So it's pretty clear, black and white there, who's good and who's bad. But beyond that, there's not much story. And because there's no communication between Samara Weaving and her boyfriend, and so much happens so fast, there's no real relationship dynamic there, and the stakes aren't very high. I don't care about Samara Weaving's boyfriend. I don't even know if she did, because it's not really shown very much in the film. And so a big driving force for her in through the film is trying to help him. And when I didn't care, it just led to like pointless action scenes, lots of chase sequences. The majority of the film isn't filled with story, it's filled with plot and lots of action that's fun at times, but also the world premise I thought was interesting enough that I wanted to get into it more. And so when you introduce the monsters, they're also interesting, and the cult dynamic and why this one woman is pregnant. There seems to be something deeper here, but when no one talks, it's never fully explained or explored, and so it's not very satisfying. So we said we we're going to get into spoilers. About halfway into this film, we're introduced to a character who does speak, and he's driving a truck, and there's GPS, and there's music, and he's speaking, and it paints it like, oh, maybe Samara Weaving and this cult are just living in their own fantasy world where the rapture occurred, and the real outside world, it didn't. And if I'm going to take that as what the film is telling me, then it really makes no sense of where these demonic monsters come from. And it's like, it's just too nonsensical. I'd have to buy into so much to think that the real world hasn't noticed this cult and these monsters out in these woods when this guy seemed to be traversing down this road he was familiar with. So while that added more complexity to the world, it also added so much more confusion, and not really in a good way, because it never comes back up around again. So again, while I was bought into the interesting world, I was never bought into the characters, and that's certainly, I think, an aspect of having them not speak at all. As far as like the look, it is kind of interesting at times. The forest looks cool, they haze it up and stuff, but it does get repetitive. You have basically the forest, their encampment, the cult encampment, and then a church, and that's basically all of the settings of the film. So it got a little repetitive. Then we get to the end of the film where, again, adds a little bit more interesting elements to the world, and this is definitely a spoiler, but the thing that gets birthed is not a baby, but it seems like a demon. Maybe Satan is born, and so it recontextualizes what the cult was after. Were they thinking they were bringing on the second coming of Jesus, or not? Because the woman who was pregnant sees the baby and kills herself, so I assume she thought she was birthing like the second coming of Jesus and not a demon. And with Azrael, smiling at the end, surrounded by the monsters with the demon, it seems like she is not who we thought she was either. But this is me just kind of pulling things out of the world that I'm still not even sure if I'm right. And yeah, there's some fun too being ambiguous, but when everything is ambiguous and there's nothing to tie down to, it can be a little frustrating as well. So I think there's a lot of cool, fun stuff happening in this film, and it wasn't boring. But ultimately, I don't think the gimmick really was worthwhile or really used that much throughout the story either. So I think it would have benefited from just having more of a traditional story being told in this world, and I think I would have liked it better. And it would have definitely better utilized Samara Weaving and her acting skills. But that's Azrael. I think I'm going to give it like a 5 out of 10. Some cool gore effects, some cool monster stuff, some cool action sequences, interesting world, but ultimately disappointing, I thought, by the end. So if you've seen it, let me know what you think. Let me know what I should be watching. Leave a comment and a like, because that helps out the channel. And I'll catch you here next time, guys. Goodbye.